Hello and welcome to ClockTower Game Studios. So in preparation for finishing the Transit Hub, as well as another project that I've got coming up that I'm already sort of working on, I decided to take a minute to do some experimentation with weathering for buildings. So one of the things that I've been noticing as I dig into my Neo Nagoya build is that while the concrete and pavement looks weathered and beat, the buildings that I've done so far look really clean, like they're fresh construction, and in most cases even cleaner than fresh construction, just because of the time it takes to build a building, there's usually already weathering on it. So I want to take a minute and address that in upcoming builds. So the things I'm looking for out of this is it needs to be relatively quick. I don't mind it taking a while to dry, but as far as the actual hands-on, I need it to be a relatively fast process. So that's priority number one. However, it also still does need to look good. So what I've done is, or what I'm going to do, or did in the video, is I made up some little test tiles, and I just used the back of my asphalt test from before, and I did the other side of them to make little building sides, sort of in the same way and with the same materials that I've been using for my buildings. So it's just foam core with some cardstock and toothpick for like piping. And then there's, I also tried a new construction material for some of the conduit. I used spaghetti pasta, like raw spaghetti. So we'll just go ahead and dive right into that. But first of all, I want to apologize for missing last week. So I did film an episode. I did an episode all about enamel washes and how to use them and what some of the advantages were. But I'm still learning video editing, and I'm trying out new software and doing it on the computer this time, and I lost data, and it's strictly my fault this time, not like last time where my hard drive crashed or something. This time I just jumped the gun and deleted files before they were supposed to be deleted, and it caused the video to crash. So I need to refilm that, but it should be a little quicker this time because I know what I'm doing. But anyway, I apologize for missing last week. I just didn't have time to get a video out. So not after losing the data anyway. So this week though, we're gonna talk all about weathering for buildings. Let's dive right in. Okay, so to begin, I have my old asphalt test tiles that I made up sitting in front of me. And I am going to use them, again, the back sides of them. So I've also got a little random piece of cardstock and some spaghetti because I'm gonna try this out. This makes great piping or rods or conduit for this kind of modeling for terrain, and it's ultra cheap, way cheaper than plastic rod. I kind of think I should have used this for some other projects recently, but for what I'm doing right now, this is probably a good use for it. So I'm gonna be trying that out in as a material, and I actually got that idea from Jeremy at Black Magic Craft. I will, for some of these, also be using, standard toothpicks for other material. But what I'm gonna be testing out is I'm gonna build a handful of little sort of urban wall scenes. I'm gonna do like a trim, I'm gonna paint them, and I'm gonna paint them all the same color. I'm gonna give them all the same kinds of details. I'm gonna use some steel conduit or some conduit that I'm gonna paint up as a metallic. I'm going to put on some wall detailing. I may try and put on some graffiti just to have it on there and to see how it works. But the biggest thing to take away from this is, and the reason I'm making all these, is I've got a lot of buildings that need a little bit of weathering coming up, and I want to know the best, easiest way to do it. So I've got a couple ideas, and I've got some recently picked up Tamiya weathering powder. Now this comes with soot and rust, and this is their kit B. I don't know how important that is, but, and then there's also a snow effect, which I probably don't need the snow. But the rust and the soot are the ones I'm most interested in at the moment. Next up, I have enamel paints and thinner. This can be used to create a grimy appearance pretty quickly on minis. I'm curious if that'll cover over to terrain building, so I'm gonna try that. And then I've got some homemade washes. These are made up using red ink, just black ink, and then this one may also have a little brown in it, but it's almost a sepia color, just a little more dark. But it's Flow-Aid or Flow Medium, Matte Medium ink, like acrylic ink, water, and I think maybe just a touch of dish soap, although the Flow Medium kind of does the same thing, and I'm not sure I put the dish soap in here, but it's just the tiniest amount of dish soap. I don't have a recipe video for these, nor am I likely to make them, because there's plenty of other videos out there that do that, that are more comprehensive and put way more testing into it than I have. So I will trust them. In particular, Jeremy at Blackmagic Craft again, and of course Luke at Now Geek Gaming Scenics. Check them out if you haven't before. They're both great. And then of course I have the old standbys, Citadel's Seraphim Sepia and Null Oil Shades. Both of those I know are gonna do fine at creating the base colors for the weathering, but I also wanna add some texture, and towards that end, I have tile grout, which you may remember I tried in my asphalt test. Actually, I have one of the tiles, the tile grout tile right there. I think a smaller amount of it sprinkled into or onto a wet wash will give me a good kind of weathered effect that has some texture without being overbearing. So I'm probably going to give that a try in this. So I'm going to create a couple different surfaces on each of my test tiles that'll be used for that. Now you'll notice that my tile grout is in a smaller container used for yogurt normally. The reason for that is the easiest way to buy it that I found, sadly, was like a big 15-pound bag, and clearly I don't need that much for this project. So I've just got what I need in a little container. Well, what I need and more. So that's my plan. The first thing I need to do is crack out some building details, which I'm going to do off camera because frankly, you guys have seen me build enough building stuff that this isn't really important. I'll probably cut in when I start using the spaghetti though, because that's going to be a little different from the norm and might be an interesting material. So we'll talk about that more later. So with that, let's get to building stuff. Okay, so I have my test tiles set aside and painted up. They are just a few simple parts. I've got an upper piece of cardstock, and then I've got a lower piece of the foam core, and I've got a toothpick or cocktail stick for one pipe, and then on the other side I have another pipe or two that's made out of raw spaghetti pasta. So they're just painted up similarly to how I've been painting my Neo Nagoya buildings. And we're gonna do some weathering to see what kind of effects we can produce. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to start with, I have a control piece so you can see the raw piece, but then I'm gonna do a Citadel wash on this one. And I'm gonna try a couple different things with it. I'm going to do just a plain black wash. They're Null Oil to start with. And I'm going to do basically panel lining with it to start with. So I'm going to paint it in right under along. I need a little more on there. I want this to just flow into that seam right there under the edge of my cardstock. And we'll just draw down some water dripping. So there's that. It's a little bit of Null Oil. We're gonna put just a little more right there at the top of the runs. And actually, I'm going to try to see if I can get it to actually run a little. Nope, not without adding too much. So I'm just going to kind of go over that again. Just a little to darken it down. So there's that for the first one. And then I'm going to do something similar around the pipes. So on one side of the pipe, so we can keep testing, I'm going to just do null oil. Do the same thing on this side where half of it's null oil. And get a little on top there. And then do another little dribble. And then on the other side, I'm going to do Seraphim Sepia, one of those. So I'm going to get that under there and on the pipes to give them a bit of a rusty appearance. And I'm just going to trail it down there. Now, realistically, it's probably going to end up being some combination of these things that works best. I may need a finer bit of a tip of a brush to do some of this. So, there's that. Yeah, I can tell already I don't really like that. Okay, so there's that. I'm going to set this aside to dry and move on to the next one. So there's Citadel washes. We're going to set those aside. Now the next thing I have here is my homemade wash. We're going to do it next. So I've got a homemade brown wash. We're going to start with it, and we're going to do just the same thing. We're going to paint down one side and kind of dab onto that. And we're going to do the same thing down here where we do part of it. One thing I will say right off the bat is my homemade wash is running off the brush a little better than the G-Dub one did. And we're gonna put a little, it's not as pigmented though, so that's an issue. If I really want to darken it down, it's gonna take some work. But I can make it run down the, for better or for worse, I can make it run down the, yeah, like so. And just, the good news is even if I do use a ton of this, it's cheap. Then you can just repeat doing that. Okay. All right, so there's the brown wash, the homemade brown. Let's do a homemade black. So one thing that I thought about that I may make up some more tiles to try after the fact, depending on how these turn out. I may make a little bit of a texture paste using these washes, as well as, this is my homemade black, by the way, using these washes as well as my little bit of tile grout and a little bit of tile grout and baking soda. That was the other one. Let that run down a little. There we go. So one thing is, this does look like it pools up pretty bad at the bottoms, but I don't know, that might be all right. So there's those. Set those out of the way. The next one is going to take a little more effort. So actually this will work. So the next thing I'm gonna do is an enamel wash, which I made a video on and then accidentally messed it up. So some quick overall tips about oils and enamels, really. So they are a little weird to use with your acrylic paints, and they're much thicker, they dry much slower, which makes them great for blending, but it also makes them kind of a pain in other ways. So right off the bat, the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna give our enamels a good shake. Oh, the other big thing about them is you can't just use them straight if you wanna make a wash out of them. They're much too thick. You have to thin them down, and the only thing to use to thin them down, because they're enamel based as opposed to acrylic or water, is thinner or mineral spirits. You have to have one or the other. I have thinner. So thinner is a little strong, and you definitely don't want to just leave the thing open for very long because it'll give you a headache, and the smell's not really that pleasant. But I'm just going to get as much water off of my brush as I can. Yeah, there's that smell. Whew, it is strong. And then I'm gonna pick a place on my palette here that's clean. I've got a nice spot right there for it. I actually am just gonna, I should get a pipette or something for this, like a little vial, dropper vial. All right, I have, that's probably about 5 drops or so. I'm just gonna add a few more and then put this back on. Actually, I'm gonna need this twice. So I'm gonna go ahead and get out enough to do both a red and black wash. So I'm just gonna mix this up on my palette off to the side here. Now, I'm not gonna do an in-depth tutorial how to do this because I do plan to redo the video that I lost, but I already had this one started, so I wanted to go ahead and finish it. So now I'm gonna wipe most of that off of my brush because we don't want the thinner in the paint. So now I've got my rust red, and I'm just gonna get a good dollop of that onto my brush and mix it into the thinner on my palette until I get the consistency I want. That's pretty good. All right, so now I'm gonna seal this up and put it out of the way. There we go. That should do. And then we're gonna do the same thing. We're just gonna paint it along there. So this is really red. I hope it dries a little less opaque, or a little less red. We're gonna give it a little bit of a rundown. We're gonna do the same thing over here. So one thing I will say right off the bat is I should be doing this a little differently. I should be using a finer brush because this is spreading out real bad. The good news is I can be a little bit sloppy with this, and it doesn't particularly matter because it doesn't particularly matter how sloppy I am with this, because this is just experimentation. We're just finding out what works. So it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be pretty. So here I'm going to use my enamel washes again with black this time. I'm just going to get me a good dollop of the black, put that in with the thinner that's on my palette so I can get, there we go, get a good wash consistency out of that. And I want to take just a little of that off. That's too much. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to come from the other side. Look at how that just flows right in there, though. Once you hit it right, it'll just run right down the crevices. This is like spot on. There we go. We're gonna do the same here, just kind of check the dribble. So here we're just painting this in along there as well. Okay, okay. Maybe some mix between these two is gonna look best. All right, so there's the basic enamel wash technique done. Let me put a cap on that and then clean my brush, which means I need to get a little more thinner out. Actually, that's how I'm gonna do it right there. Put that cap just loose on there for a second. Do just a little more the same way. Like I said, this stuff is potent, so. Okay, that's good enough. So, gonna dump that, clean up my mess. Clean up my mess without making a huge mess, which is probably a little late, but whatever, here we are. Put this away. All right, and then last but not least, this is one that I'm most intrigued by because I've never ever used it before, and that is Tamiya weathering powders. So this comes in like a little, almost like a makeup palette. So I'm gonna do this is supposed to be soot. Okay, so I guess I'm supposed to use the sponge for this. And then we're just gonna, oh, yeah, okay. See, we're learning together. Isn't learning together fun? All right, let's give the other side a try. Well, that's inconvenient. Okay, so right off the bat, this is good for like leaving a smudge mark, but it's not really doing me much good as far as the actual. Okay, well, we're gonna move on and try the rust side. Well, right there, I can tell you I have messed up by trying to do both with the black. Am I supposed to? All right, well, I'm gonna say right off the bat that part of this is my problem. I don't know. Really what I'm doing here. And my sponge is contaminated because the black in my palette broke. This may not be the most accurate test of this ever, if I'm being fair. So what I'm doing now is I can see that there's a little bit of a layer of black on top of the rust, and the rust isn't really coming out. There we go. Now we've got some on there. Let's try that. That looks pretty all right. Let's try it up there. To be determined. All right, so I'm gonna set this aside and let it dry, as well as the others. And I'm gonna go wash my hands. So here we've got my control weathering powder, weathering powder palette, the homemade washes, and the Citadel washes. Need to wash my hands. I'll come back in an hour or so after this has all had a chance to dry and set. We'll take another look at it and see what we can do to improve it. Right now, I'm not happy with any of these as is, so that's not good. Brown-wise, first glance, I like the homemade wash the most, but it took a lot more effort to get there. And I like the black enamel wash the most out of these. So I think I'm just gonna have to keep experimenting a little and figure out what works. Okay, now that things have had a chance to dry, let's take a look at what we've got. Okay, so yeah, these are all dry. So the weathering powder, I'm gonna chalk up to user error. I'm gonna have to learn how to use those. I don't know how to use them, and that's an issue. I have my homemade wash here. The black did nothing on the standard gray sections, unless it was really layered on there thick. The brown, on the other hand, looks pretty good. I might use the brown as that is. The Citadel, I mean, the Nuln Oil looks pretty good. It looks better. The sepia is a little too red, orangey, which isn't what I want at all, but that's okay. And then the enamel wash, the red is much too red. The black looks pretty good though. The black, actually, I like the way it's spread out and the way it's kind of glossy almost. I might use it. There's one more tool that I forgot I had, so I'm gonna go take and grab those, and I will be right back, and we'll do them on the control piece. All right. Okay, lastly, I forgot I had these, but I have these enamel stain markers, and I have grime, rust, and concrete. Never used these before, so this is going to be a learning experience too. Leave cap on, shake for 30 seconds before use, invert and depress tip several times until wet. Recap tightly after use. So let's start with the grime one, because that seems like a good one to go with. So give it a good shake. And here we're gonna got a nice chisel tip to it. Hopefully you can't hear the kids downstairs being loud and obnoxious. There we go. Okay, so let's just... All right, well, there's a little grime. So let's do concrete next and see what that comes up looking like. Okay, so my guess is these are going to be similar in finish to my enamel washes I made, being as they are enamel stain markers. Purely a guess. Again, I've never used these before, and we're learning on camera together. So let's give that another, there we go. All right, so this one's called concrete. And I'm just gonna looks like dust to me more than anything. Hopefully it dries with a good finish. And then we're gonna try the rust one. Oh, apparently these use Rust-Oleum enamels. Intriguing. Here we go. Well, this looks like a nice, happy little... We'll see how that works out. Okay, so that's gonna need time to dry. But while it's drying, I'm gonna move on to some other pieces and see what we can do to make them a little better. So I've got my tile grout here in a separate container. And I'm not gonna get my face in that because it's really fine particles. So I'm gonna use my hobby knife and I'm gonna use my homemade wash here. And I'm gonna mix up a wash with a little grime in it, or maybe sprinkle a little in it as we go. So let's try that. Let's try that one first. I've got just a little here. I don't think this is gonna take much to get a good effect. I really liked my black wash, or my brown wash rather. So I'm gonna get a little more of it. And I'm gonna get it onto, that's a little much. Get it on there. There we go. Get some of it off. We don't necessarily want it pooling on there. There we go. All right, and then I'm going to just use my hobby knife here and sprinkle on a little tile grout to give it a little grime. And I'm gonna use a toothpick to work it down where I want it because it's a little tough and I'm trying not to contaminate my brush. So let's get that down in there. All All right, so there's one with tile grout. And now we're gonna do one with baking soda and see where that lands us. Because I think it'll give a similar effect. But maybe since it's a little bit more fine grained, maybe, okay. Maybe it'll look just a little better. So I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna paint on enough of the wash to give a good liquid base on both sides and across the top there. There we go. And then I'm going to use my hobby knife to get some of the baking soda and just sprinkle it on. Oh, that spread really quick. So this is kind of hard to work with. I hope the toothpick will let me put it more where I want it. Okay, so right off the bat, I think the baking soda is the better way to go, but I think my application method wasn't as good. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back to my control piece that's still wet, so no, I'm not. I'm gonna go to my enamel wash, and we're gonna use it, actually. So the homemade wash, especially the brown, I think is gonna work that way. So we're gonna do the black the same way on the homemade wash on just a section here along the top. Let's try and get that to run into the crevice there. And then we'll soak up whatever we don't want. There we go. Kind of feather it down. But I want to feather it down in more than one place. So we're gonna bring it down along there. Okay, so one side of this I'm gonna do with my tile grout, which will be again on this side. And I will use my toothpick again to it leaves a good texture, but it's a little too chunky. So I also know that this is kind of hard to control. So I think the better way to do it is I'm gonna get a little bit of that wash onto my toothpick and then I'll just give it a little more. Yeah, it's just what is the best way to apply this going to be? All right, I think that's got the best overall texture. Hopefully it turns out okay. So I'm gonna let that dry and we'll come back and check on it again here in about another hour. Okay, so let's take a look at what we got here. We got the weathering pins, which they have good color. I like the rust a lot, especially. The others not so much. I don't know. The concrete one kind of left a good color for like a watermark, so maybe it would be useful. I'm not sold. The rust one's not bad, but I didn't get as much texture out of it as I expected. And then here are the homemade washes with the tile grout and baking soda. So the baking soda actually, if applied better, it left a better texture. You can see it would need some sort of a sealer to lock it in, but you can see a little bit of grime there under the edge. Hopefully Let's see if I can get that up for the camera enough to pick it up. Let's get a light over it too. There we go. Okay, so there you can see a little bit of texture underneath the lip there on that side. And you can see a little bit of the grime a bit better there. I like it. I'm curious to try it with the enamel washes to see how well that works. Fortunately, the enamel washes stay solvent for quite a while. I just need to add a little more thinner to revitalize them. And I'm going to do this a little different this time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sprinkle on, helps if I actually take stuff out of my mouth so I can talk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sprinkle on a little bit of that where I want it to be. And I'm going to do that there. And there. And I'm going to do a little bit. Dang it, come on. This isn't as easy as I figure it should be. There we go. So now that I've got my thinner out, there we go. All right, and I'm just gonna let that pull down a little. I didn't really like the red, so I'm only gonna try this with the black and see what kind of textures we get. All right, I think that will be my success. All right, so that needs to dry a little. I think I'm gonna do kind of the same thing on this side though. I'm gonna come back over the grime with the homemade washes and see what we get. That looks appropriately grimy. Okay. Okay, so here we have our finished, completely dried materials. So here you can see I've got, this was the enamel washes, and some of them have the different kinds of grit in them. And I think in the end, after doing a couple different tests with the homemade washes and with the enamel washes, which I guess are also a homemade wash, this actually looks really good, and I really like the way they look together, especially with the baking soda in it. The tile grout was almost too fine. It didn't really leave a noticeable texture, which is fine, I suppose, but the baking soda, I especially liked how it looked in the black, or in the brown rather, on the homemade wash, and in the black on the enamel wash. So I'm gonna be weathering up some buildings coming up sometime soon, and I think those are gonna be how I do it. So let's get these gathered up and do an outro. All right, well, as I was saying in the last clip, out of all the ones I tried, out of all the techniques and tools I tried, I like the brown homemade wash with the baking soda in it the most for a brown color, rust color, and I like the enamel wash in black with the baking soda the most for a black color. So what I've learned through doing all this is, one, my enamel washes, I need to get a brown color for weathering, because I think if I had an actual brown instead of this rust red, I would have liked that more probably than my homemade brown wash, and it would have been a little faster. I'm kind of digging these enamel washes lately, so I'll probably get back into that. That said, the homemade washes I have, I think I need to add a little more black ink to my black period, whether it's just with or without the baking soda. It really took a lot of effort to get any kind of pigment onto the model at all, so that's no good. Definitely need to add a little more black ink to that, which that's not a big deal. It's just learning the consistency and the effect I want. So that's good to know for next time. Out of all these, the ones that I like the least are probably the enamel pins, like the enamel weathering pins that I had. The rust one isn't bad, but it's also not great, and I don't think there's a good way for me to put the baking soda in it to get the effect I want. So I'm just gonna have to move on with that. Maybe if I were doing something a little different, some different kind of model, it would work, or a different larger scale where I didn't need quite the pinpoint accuracy that I do for this. But I really need to be able to get exactly where I'm trying to put the weathering around the crevices and cracks and stuff. So I want to make sure I have a lot of control. And again, the enamel wash, I can use whatever brush I want, whereas the weathering pen, even though it's enamel also, it did give kind of the same sort of overall effect, just a lot less controlled. So they're okay, not great, won't be using them again. Kind of the same goes for the Citadel washes in that they're too dark. The black is Nuln Oil is too black, and the other one just wasn't a color I liked. So maybe if I tried Agrax Earthshade or one of the other ones, a more brown one instead of a sepia, maybe I'd have liked that more. I think the enamel wash, once I get a brown, is going to be better though, so I'm just going to stick with that. The weathering palette. Let's talk about the Tamiya weathering powder palette. I don't know what they're trying to achieve with this, but all I got out of it was smudges, which I guess is okay, but it's really not the effect I was looking for. I guess if I were doing smoke stains, which I suppose is what it's for, you use the sponge for that. I tried to use the brush for the rust and didn't like what I got out of it. I also tried to use the sponge for the brush and didn't like the effect that got. I'm kind of disappointed in those. I'm sure part of it is user error. I don't really know what I'm doing with it, but I'll get there. I'm definitely gonna have to experiment with that one some more. And then yeah, like I said, the homemade washes, the enamel and the other one, the acrylic one, both turned out best with baking soda. So I'm gonna continue that, and that's probably gonna be what I use on the upcoming Neo Nagoya builds to get the weathering I want. It's fast to apply. It takes a little while to dry, but that's okay. The most important thing is that I can do it in a hurry and then let it sit and dry, because that's less time hands-on. That leaves me available to do other stuff. So I'm excited to test these out on some actual buildings. I will probably go at the Kanban from a while back and do some weathering on it to kind of test practical application, so to speak, of the whole process and see what I come up with. So look forward to that, and look forward to some other builds. So if this video inspired you, or if you learned anything from it, be sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button so you keep up with what we're doing, hit the notification bell so you'll see what we're doing every time, and be sure to share the video so your friends see it too. Always great to have more viewership. That lets us see what we want to make more of as far as videos go. I found that my recent kind of experimentation, hobby lab type videos have done better The full walkthrough start to finish of the concrete seems to have been popular, so maybe I'll do another one similar to that for the weathering when I actually sit down to do it. So thank you guys for watching all the videos so far and keeping up with us. Thank you for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. And remember, at the Clock Tower, it's always game time.